4 is remember that we've made different lists in the fourth step. There are essentially 4 different lists, but one of them is sort of harms done others and harms done others sexually. So it's like the same list, it's just separated into 2 categories. So we had the list of resentments on 64, 65, part of 66. We had the list of fears. We had the list of harms done others on 66. Oh, wait a minute, where was that? Harms done others on 67. And now we've had the fears list last week on 68. And now we're doing the sex inventory on 69. And the reason that there's different lists, why isn't it just one big fourth step list? Because there are, remember what he said in page 64, he said we're going to find these things and we're going to face them and be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us from God. So why are there different lists? Because there are different spiritual solutions to be applied to those lists. Each one of those lists is dealt with in a different way. The resentments are dealt with through forgiveness, and the directions for forgiveness are on the bottom of 66, top of 67. And the harms done others and harms done others sexually are dealt with through amends. And the fears list is dealt with through faith in God. And each one of those spiritual solutions has directions on how to carry them out. And each one of those spiritual solutions of the 3, actually I'm going to say 4, but one of them is really step 5, is out. Whereas the amends are outlined as being steps 8 and 9, and forgiveness is like 6 and 7, and faith in God is essentially step 12. The fifth step is one of the spiritual solutions because it brings into play the important, the admission of our defects. Is a critical part in there, obviously. That was even in the 6 steps of the Oxford group. Admission of our defects was in the that the 6 steps of the Oxford groups became the 12 steps of the Alcoholics Anonymous, and several steps weren't in there. Steps like 6 weren't there, 8 weren't there. I don't think 10 was in there. And some steps were lumped together. They were seen as 3 of our steps were like one of theirs before. Like I think the complete reliance and dependence upon God for them was one step, and ours is like 3, like 2, 3, and 11 and 12 or something like that. But anyway, we're talking about today the sex inventory, and we will get to the end of that, and we'll see how the sex inventory starts to interact with some of the other steps. You remember that no step stands alone. Sorry, I got the remnants of that cold I had last week. No step stands alone. That each step is dependent upon the step that came before it for its successful completion, and each step builds on the step that comes after it. And we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. We're making an attempt to find what's been blocking us from turning our will and our lives over to the care of God. And we are now we reviewed our own conduct over the years past on page 69 here. Remember when he says we, he's talking about the first 100, not we the family, not we, me and you. He's saying if you want what we had, you'll do what we did. And what we did was we reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? ? Whom had we hurt? Now, that whom had we hurt is obviously going to be the names of the women, wives, ex-wives, girlfriends, ex-girlfriends that we had been with over the years. If there was any women in here, I'd say the men, but there aren't any women in here tonight. Remember that these are question marks because they intend you to answer these questions. Not with a yes or a no, but with an actual answer. What did you do? Where had you been selfish and dishonest? And dishonest covers a lot. All those women that I've been with, where did I lie to them, steal from them, cheat them, do something that would hurt them out of selfishness in any way that I hurt them? Did I unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? ? Where was I at fault? ? Or what should I have done instead? That's a big one. What should I have done instead? Obviously, I shouldn't have lied. I shouldn't have cheated. We got this all down on paper and looked at it, okay? And that's the directions in that one little paragraph, that 6 lines there, is the directions for step 4, list 4, harms done others sexually. And then he looks back on it and says, and in this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. And we subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideals and help us live up to them. Now, where is it that we're going to ask God to mold our ideals and help us live up to them? This is obviously, whenever you see these words, we ask God. Those words together are always a reference to a prayer, okay? And in each one of the times that he's telling us that we're going to pray to God for something, that's the way he describes it. We ask God. We ask God to mold our ideals and help us live up to them. Now, this could be seen as part of Step 6, but it's more frequently, the way I see it, as part of Step 11. And Step 11 is when we seek through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact. And later on down here, he does say, in meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. So I'm gonna lean more towards the Step 11 reference. That in this prayer, he's saying this isn't in the fourth step that we actually say this prayer. Because remember, all these steps are intended to be worked within a short period of time. And what he's making reference to here is how they interact with one another. So we've made an inventory of what we've done to these people, and he's fixing to tell us about making amends also here in this next paragraph. We ask God to mold our ideals and help us live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised or loathed. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. And here's this reference to Step 8 and 9. It really looks like it's just a reference to Step 8, but he says we must be willing to make amends, and that's obviously Step 8, where we have done harm, provided that we do not still bring about more harm in so doing. And I believe that's a reference to Steps 8 and 9. Okay? He doesn't say now that when we go out and do those amends, but he does. It's clearly a reference to those two steps. I always look at all of those steps in pairs, 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 as pairs. They really don't stand alone. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, so there's a reference to Step 11, meditation. Obviously, he says in Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact, and this is what we're trying to do here, is improve our conscious contact with God and find what he wants us to do with our sex life. So in meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it. Now, he's saying each specific matter, not in the past for all the women that we've heard in the past, but back up there in the future, he says, back up there right after the thing, he says our future sex life. In this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life, is the reference that he's now using right here. Obviously, making amends for our past wrongs and trying to learn from them is one of them, but this reference to the future sex life is obviously the 11th step, when he says the right answer will come if we want it. That's also one of the ideas out in Step 11, where he says that if our house is in order, the right answers will come, sort of out in a vision for you. And in the 11th step, I says we will make some mistakes, but as long as we want to grow towards the right thing, as long as our motives are right, we're on the right path. And sorry for what we've done if we've hurt anybody in the future. The right answer will come if we want it. God alone can judge our sex situation. And here is one of the few references to sponsorship or any kind of guide other than God, because most of the time you'll see how he's asking God for guidance. And right here is a reference to another human being. He says, God alone can judge our sex situation. However, counsel with persons is often desirable. But we let God be the final judge. We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice. That's one of the ideas that I've adopted from someone who was teaching me the steps when I used to, when I first started sponsoring people. And it was going on quite a bit. I had gone to NA meetings before, and there's a lot of this going on in other programs, out there, is that someone who has time and sobriety, 10, 15, 20 years, is seen as like some kind of guru, and then the new guy comes in and thinks that this other person has the ability to give them direction in their life, and thinks, hey, you got more time than me. Tell me what should I do about these specific matters in my life. And there was a lot of that going on when I got sober, so I fell into it too. When my sponsees would call me, I'd tell them exactly what they should do about their problems. And then I later, you could see in the fourth step where he says, we avoid hysterical thinking or advice. We realize that other people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. And then he's got on the other page here, we have the voices who cry for sex and more sex, and people who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most troubles, and then we got the people who, think that the sex is a base necessity of procreation. So you've got these two opposite ends of the spectrum as far as, any ideals about not just sexual behavior, but all your behavior. Some people might think it's okay to be a little dishonest every once in a while, and maybe pull up to a parking meter that's got time left on it and use that time. And then someone else might say, oh, you can't do that, just it's dishonest. And some people are just hardcore honest about every little. They won't even, if someone asks them flat out something they should lie about, they won't lie about it. And even when it says except when to do so would injure them or others, but some people, and I later found that it's not right to give that kind of advice to people. And it was taught to me by someone who I think is very smart, and he said, what you can do, you see, they're looking for advice. Somebody is going to call you as a sponsee on the phone, is going to say, what should I do about this specific matter? And it's very easy to let your ego take over and say, oh, I know exactly what you should do about that. But the hard thing is to turn them to God. It's the right thing to do also. And through the steps, take whatever problem it is they call you with and tell them how to apply the steps to it on the basis that it will be based in anger, fear, or guilt that they're feeling. Anything that they're experiencing will fall into one of those three categories. And all I have to do from now on is figure out which, maybe even all three of them sometimes, 1, 2, and all three of those will fall into those. It'll fall into all three of those categories. So when someone calls me and says, I got a problem, I take them straight to the 4th step inventory. Step 5, admit it. Step 6 and 7, ask God to remove it and help me with it. Steps 8 and 9, make any amends if you've done it. And step 12, turn your attention to helping others. That's the solution for everything that they'll call me with. And that's, I think, what he's talking about here when he's talking about we let God be the final judge. Counsel with other persons is often desirable. I think that you could fit anything into that category. And we're talking about sexual behavior here, but you could say the same thing about honesty or dishonesty. Like, maybe you found a bag of money on the side of the road and you can't tell who it belongs to, There's no name. If you walk up to anybody and go, hey, did you lose a bag of money? Everybody's going to go, yeah, I lost a bag of money, So now what do you do with a bag of money? You take it to the cops. My personal opinion is if there ain't no sign of whose money it is, it's now your money. But some people say, oh, you got to take it to the cops. There's a guy down at the cop station right now looking for a bag of money, and you got his bag of money or something, And you can't get into something like that. It's between each individual and their God of their understanding as to what to do about something like that. And you can take any situation in your life and fall into that category of this group over here thinks it's, oh, you're doing the wrong thing, and that group thinks you're doing the right thing. It's between them and God. I think the selfishness, the two ideas of selflessness and selfishness are the best filter for everything that comes down the pike. And he says also, suppose we fall short of a chosen ideal and stumble. Does this mean we're going to get drunk? Obviously, we're in the sex inventory, and you could apply this to just about any area of your life. But, okay, let's say he says, suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Obviously, then there's something you've done with your sexual partner, and she doesn't know about. You've cheated on her again, or you've maybe, I don't know, got some money out of the bank account and did something with it you shouldn't have done or whatever. Suppose this does this mean we're going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but this is only a half-truth. It depends on us and our motives. If we are sorry for what we have done and have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven, and we will have learned our lesson. If we are not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. We are not theorizing. These are the facts out of our experience. So in other words, if I do something and I go, you know what, to hell with her, screw her, who is she? If I say something like that, then it's not a good sign. But if I say something like, man, I shouldn't have done that, I got to make amends for that, I got to come clean, I got to go clean this mess up because this is going to haunt me. This is going to haunt me for days, weeks, or months or whatever, and I might drink over this, then I'm on the right path. But the fact that I've hurt someone else, the fact that I've hurt someone that I know, is not going to be the deciding factor as to whether I drink or not. Whether I drink or not depends upon my motives behind it. Am I truly sorry for what I did? Or am I just thinking, Big Brother's watching, I better do this or they're going to find out? Because in my heart, I can tell you that I would say I want to straighten this out because I know it's the right thing to do. To sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right ideal. Obviously, that's a reference to step 11. In step 11, we're going to pray for the right ideal, for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity and for the strength to do the right thing. If sex is very troublesome, and many people use this next sub-paragraph, these next 2 or 3 lines, as it's almost a description of the whole 12 steps. It's a description of the idea behind the 12 steps. You could say, if anger is very troublesome, I throw myself the harder into helping others. If fear is very troublesome, I throw myself the harder into helping others. Or you could even erase sex and just put self. If selfishness is very troublesome, I throw myself the harder into helping others. I think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. And that is essentially the most basic principle of Alcoholics Anonymous. The whole reason for the 12 steps is to find what's blocking me from actually genuinely thinking about other people. I think of their needs and work for them. This takes me out of myself, and it quiets. So here he's saying that this imperious urge is quieted by helping others, thinking of others, working for others, throwing myself the harder into helping others. Quiets the imperious urge, which is obviously a reference to the thought of the first drink that creeps back into my head. That first drink is rooted. This imperious urge is driven by fear, and all fear is based in self. There's nothing that you could be afraid of that is not based in self. I've never been afraid for somebody else. I was always afraid that I was going to, if I was afraid for someone else, it was because somewhere along the line I was going to lose something that was important to me. I was never afraid that that they were going to feel pain, that they were going to suffer. I was always afraid that I was going to lose someone that was close to me. If we have been thorough about our personal inventory, we've written down a lot. Now, this is the summary of the 4th step, and in this summary, he's going to tell us the spiritual solutions here. A brief glance at them, if you'll look at them. We've written down a lot. We have listed and analyzed our resentments. We have begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. We have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men. And this is a reference to that forgiveness there. When he says we have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even our enemies, for we look on them as sick people. That's definitely one of the phrases he uses in the directions for how to forgive. For we see them just like ourselves, they're sick. They're trying to find their way too. And we have listed the people we have hurt by our conduct and are willing to straighten out the past if we can. That's a reference to making amends. When we're feeling guilty for our actions, we make amends to clear that guilt out of the way, because this anger and this guilt is what's blocking us from thinking of others and throwing ourselves harder into helping others and working for them, and takes us out of our imperious urge, quiets the imperious urge. In this book, we read again and again that faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves. So it's essentially, what is it that we say we could not do for ourselves? Well, we couldn't say no to the first drink. That faith is what is going to combat this. That faith is the combat of that imperious urge. That's a reference to faith in God. When you see him say, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets that imperious urge. When to yield would mean heartache. That is a reference to step 12, and that is a reference to faith in God. We hope you are now convinced that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from him. Now, obviously, that's a pretty deep statement there. Am I convinced? We hope you are now convinced that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from him. If you have already made a decision in that 3rd step back there and an inventory of your grosser handicaps, you have made a good beginning. That being so, you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. So, in the 4th step, we found those three most common manifestations of self that block us from receiving and doing God's will. They were resentment, fear, and the guilt from the lists of the harms done others and harms done others sexually. We've seen references to the spiritual solutions on how to get rid of those: forgiveness, faith in God, and making amends. And even the fifth step has been referenced in here. The fifth step was referenced on page 67 toward the bottom down there. The second full paragraph, the bottom of that paragraph, he says, we admitted our wrongs honestly. That's a reference to step 5. And we're willing to set these matters straight is a reference to steps 8 and 9. Even though he only says willing, we were willing to set these matters straight. We've seen, if we follow directions, we can see that step 6 and 7 are the steps where we ask God to remove those things. So any reference to forgiveness was a reference to 6 and 7. And any reference to faith in God, getting out of ourselves, was a reference to the chapter with working with others, step 12. And the amends of the 9th step are outlined on page 76 through 84. There's like 9 pages of the 9th step out there. When we get out there, we'll go over those. So we are also convinced. You see what he says? We hope you are now convinced that God can remove whatever self-will. If you'll remember back in the 3rd step, he said the first requirement of the 3rd step is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly, on 60 in the page 60 at the bottom of the page there, the top of that last paragraph down there. The first requirement of the 3rd step is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. And on that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. And that's what he's making a reference to when he says, we hope you are now convinced that God can remove. So that's one of the things we got from the 4th step. How to do the inventory in steps 10 and 11. This is going to be the same inventory, and it's going to be the same spiritual solutions. It's just the time frame that 4 is like your past, and step 10 will be step 10 and 11 will be your daily inventory that you do based on your experience with the past inventories. Chapter 6, into action. We'll get a couple of paragraphs in here. Okay, so having made our personal inventory, what shall we do about it? ? We have been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and to discover the obstacles in our path. Let's see, that's we have been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator. I guess you might say that would be like, step 3, I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God, a reference to the 3rd step. And to discover the obstacles in our path in step 4. We have admitted certain defects and have ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. We have put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory. Now these are about to be cast out. And this requires action on our part. And remember that action is, each one of those spiritual solutions does have action in them. Faith in God, it's obviously, how can I be of... it takes us out of ourselves. We work for others. We think of their needs. That's the reference he made. That's the work in faith in God. The work in making amends is quite clear. You tell these people you're sorry, and you show them you're sorry, and you pay them back for what you've done to them. And the action outlined in faith in God is described as being, when a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? He says, we cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. That's the action outlined in forgiveness. How can I be helpful? Along with the action of the inventory. And inventory is action. Admission in step 5 is action. And each one of these also brings God into the mix. The spiritual solutions always bring myself, God, and another human being into each one of these spiritual solutions, which when completed will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our defects. So he's used a different term here already. He says the exact nature of our wrongs on page 59 back there, 58, 59. I think that's 58, 59, right? Or is that 5960? No, it's 5960. On page 59, he uses a different term. Now he's saying the exact nature of our defects, which doesn't mean anything. All it means is that he's using a different term. But he's talking about the same things, the most common manifestations of self. This is the way somebody explained it to me. He said, in the fourth step, I'm going to find the 4 most common manifestations of self that block me from receiving and doing a life of service and self-sacrifice, which is what we believe to be God's will. In step 5, I admitted the exact nature of my wrongs, and what's wrong for an alcoholic is self-will. What's right is God's will. What it is that I admit are these 3 most common manifestations of self that block me from receiving and doing God's will, which is a life of work and self-sacrifice for others. In step 6, I'm entirely ready to have God remove those defects of character. Which ones? The same ones. The 3 most common, and all these phrases are coming from the Big Book. The most common manifestations of self came from page 64. The number of these comes from out in the 10th step, where he says we continue to take this personal inventory, and then he says we continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. He says we continue to watch for selfishness in the form of dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Those are like the 3 most common manifestations of self that block us from receiving and doing, which is another one of the phrases he uses on page 64. We're looking to face and be rid of what's blocking us from doing that 3rd step. Okay, this brings us to the 5th step in the program of recovery mentioned in the preceding chapter. And I think we're going to stop there and open the meeting up, and we'll pick up right there next week. This is perhaps difficult, especially discussing our defects with another person. And that's where we'll pick up next week on Chapter 6, Into Action. So that gives each one of you guys about 5 minutes to blab. Don't forget spiritual solutions. Tonight we're on step 6. And step 6 begins on the bottom of page 75. Okay, last week we did step 5. To summarize, I'm going to babble for about 30 minutes, and we'll open up the floor for open discussion. Anybody who wants to comment on the steps or ask questions or give us some of their words of wisdom. So let's review where we've been in the past here. We've been, as Bill Wilson put it, we've been trying to get a new relationship with our Creator. And I believe one of the promises of the 5th step was we begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. And the question might come to one, how is it that I begin to feel the nearness of my Creator in the 5th step? Because if you'll look back onto the 4th step, he says, actually in the pages of the 4th step, we hope you are now convinced that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from Him. And there's several places within the 4th step we are instructed to ask God to help us and to enter our lives. And one of the things that I learned about Bill Wilson over the years was that in the 4th step, he didn't just write the 4th step. He wrote how the other steps interact with the 4th step. He wrote that now anger, you're looking to you're looking to face what's blocking you from God, and you're looking to get rid of what's blocking you from God. And in that process of getting rid of what's blocking you from God, you bring God into the situation. The spiritual solutions that we have, which is the 5th step, admission of these defects. The 6 and 7 is essentially deals with forgiveness, the way that I see it, because 8 and 9 obviously deals with amends, and step 12 it deals with faith in God. But all of them do still, come into the 5th step, and 6 and 7. Where 6 and 7, you ask God to remove what's blocking you from Him through the process that is outlined, and in steps 8 and 9 you make amends, and steps 12 you have faith in God. But in the 4th step, all of these things are explained. So many people may be reading it and not fully understand what they're seeing there. And like the path to forgiveness, where he says we had to get rid of these resentments. I'll tell you what, now go to the page and I'll show you how to cross-reference them, because I don't want to just talk out of the top of my head here. In the 4th step is is on page 66 at the bottom. Now, this is the end of the resentment list. We've just made the resentment list, and here at the bottom of the page here, he says, we turn back to the list, for it held the key to the future. You see the top, let's see, it's about one paragraph up from the bottom, about 10 or 12 lines. We turn back to the list, for it held the key to the future. Now, when is it we turn back to the list? Not in the fourth step. In the fourth step, you make the list. So it's in step 5, in step 6 and 7, and in steps 8 and 9 that we turn back to this list, okay? That's a reference to something you're going to be doing later on. But it's found here in the pages of the fourth step. So one of the things that I've learned over the years that Bill Wilson does is he doesn't tell you what the problem is and then walk away from it and leave you hanging. He immediately tells you what the solution is. So this is what he says here, and you're going to see how in this explanation here that he's telling us that we're going to bring God into our lives to help us deal with this, that we're going to apply what we come to call the spiritual solutions to the spiritual sickness that we have. Okay, he says, we turn back to that list, for it held a key to the future. And you have to ask yourself, why does the list hold the key to the future? Because remember in the beginning of the fourth step, he said we're going to face what's blocking us from God, and we're going to be rid of what's blocking us from God. So to say that you've done the fourth step, all that is to face what's blocking you from God. And the application to be rid of these things comes in 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Okay. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. We began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had power to actually kill. How could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? And now here's a key point that he's pointing out here. You know, you see it as just a quick sentence that he breezes through here. And I got to tell you, I read stuff like this for years and didn't see anything there until somebody slowed me down and said, pay attention to what you're reading. He says, we could not wish them away any more than alcohol. You see what he's saying there? He's saying that if I tell you you've got a serious anger problem and you go, oh, I got a serious anger problem. You know, I've been noticing that myself. I'm getting into a lot of heated exchanges with people, either close to me or complete strangers. I don't know where we go off on each other. So I think I believe that my friend told me that I have an anger problem, and I am going to do something about it. I'm going to stop being angry. Well, guess what? You can't stop being angry just by saying, I want to stop being angry. Look what he says. We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. You see the reference he's making? Remember back when I decided to stop drinking alcohol and I said, you know what, I'm starting to have a little problem with this. I'm waking up in jail a lot more often, getting into fights, getting kicked out of bars, and the bars I'm in. And so I remember I made a decision one day to stop drinking, and you know what? It didn't seem to make a difference. I drank anyway. I took every kind of oath there was and every kind of swearing off, and I drank anyway. So that's the same light that I see this anger in now, that I can no more be rid of my anger than I could my alcohol. And he says this was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us. Now these two paragraphs here are essentially a reference to step 6, because he's fixing to tell you that you're going to ask God to come into your life here. And that's why in step 5 he says we begin to feel the nearness of our Creator, because we're getting some idea now. In the 5th step, we've applied this solution, the spiritual solution of making, the admission of these defects, to be honest about, when I go back into the how it works in the 3rd step back there, where he says those who do not recover are people who cannot completely give themselves to this program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. We're all familiar with that. This is the part where it comes down to it from myself that I believe that he's talking about when he says constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. Someone who actually says, you know what, I think they're right. I have a problem with anger, and I have no control over it whatsoever. And you'll see this in other people. When I started to wake up to my anger one day, I began to watch other people as they got angry and to see how out of control they were. That they're not making a conscious decision to get in somebody's face because, they thought that they were being, what's that word that's so famous today? Disrespectful, that somebody was being disrespectful to them and they wanted to get in their face and give them when you actually see it in somebody else, you're going to say the same thing I did. I say, I see it now. I see that person is out of control. That anger has got him in a corner, and it's literally an instinct. He's running on instinct, like a wild animal backed into a corner, fighting for its life. That's what that anger is in my life. And if you look into 12 and 12, he says a lot of instincts gone astray. There's a lot in the 12 and 12 about instincts, but I'm not. I think he's gone off into the sin thing too much in there. He's got the religious deal going in the 12 and 12 a lot. Whereas in here, remember that the Alcoholics Anonymous sprung from the Oxford groups, and the Oxford groups was a religious group, but they didn't say what God you had to believe in, and they didn't tell you, they didn't say a word about their God either. All they said was, we got a path to find that you can get out of this problem you're having. So this is the spiritual solution. This is a reference to step 6 and 7. When in step 6 and 7 is when you ask God to remove what it is that's blocking you from him. So this was our course, he says. We realized that the people who wronged us, and you'll see as we work our way through these next 2 paragraphs that there's actual steps involved in the forgiveness process. The first part of this step is to write down what it is you're angry about. Okay? The second part of this step is to tell it to somebody else. And it doesn't say you got to find a specific person. Nowhere in here does it say that we have sponsors. It just says it could. Remember when we were going over the 5th step, the question for almost 3 paragraphs was, who is to hear our 5th step? And he goes on and on about it could be a family member, but we can't disclose anything to them that might hurt them. It could be a priest, a minister, a rabbi, or whatever. And so he goes on about that. But anyway, this was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. Period. So I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to say, I understand that I definitely understand that I am a spiritually sick person. Therefore, I can easily see that other people around me are probably spiritually sick just like myself, And when I see other people and their behavior, and I see my behavior in them, it becomes easier for me to see them in the same light that I am. Not like I'm any better than them or they're any better than me, but I always say we're all trying to find our own way. So I stop and I say they're sick just like me, first of all. And then we go on and it says, we ask God to help us. Not we ask God to do it for us. I know a lot of people say, and even in the 6 and 7, it makes a reference to we ask God to remove these defects of character, and just somehow the God hand waves by and it's gone, and we don't have any anger anymore. But that's not my experience. My experience with it is to go on with what we're reading here and to closely look where he says we ask God to help us. And that's one of the things we're getting at here is we're doing step 6 tonight. Step 6 is only like 2 paragraphs. And one of the things we're looking at here is to be entirely ready to have God remove these defects. But anyway, we'll get into that when we get on those pages there. We ask God in steps 6 and 7 to help us, show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. So here's where I bring God into this situation. And the reason we went back here was to say in step 5 it said we had begun to feel the nearness of our Creator. And I would have, any logical person would say, how the hell is that? How is it that I began to feel the nearness of my Creator in step 5? What's that got to do? This is what it's got to do with it, is we bring God into these situations, and we acknowledge, and we're going to turn to God. And when we're looking at this, he says, we ask God to help us. This obviously is a reference to turning to God and saying, please help me with my anger, God. I definitely, if I'm going to be completely honest with myself, I have a serious anger problem, and it's out of my control, just like my alcoholism. We cheerfully go, so we ask God to help us, show them the same tolerance, patience, pity, and patience we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, many people refer to this as the 4th step prayer, but remember, stop and think about it for a minute. You're not asking God to remove these things in the 4th step. This is a reference to a latter step. All he's doing here is he didn't leave us hanging with the problem while he went on to some other situation. He gave us the problem, anger, and now right after anger, he's telling us what the solution is, which is a reference to a latter step. There's many references in here to many of the other steps in here. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. And now this is the part here where he says, how can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry. Thy will be done. So you see the part where there's action in there. There's a part where I write it down. I recognize it, I write it down, I share it with another person, I ask God to remove it, and I direct my attention to how I can be of help to this person. There's action involved in spirit. All our spiritual solutions, all of the spiritual solutions, we have 4 of them. Admission, faith in God, forgiveness, and making amends. And those 4 spiritual solutions that we have are designed to rid us of the most common manifestations of self. And those are the words of the Big Book, remember. We're looking to face and to be rid of the most common manifestations of self from which all other forms of self stem. So these are, like, you call these the primary forms of self, which are the instigator for all the other subforms that ride below them. You could easily see that in fear too. That, like when he says that fear is at the root of all of our anger. No matter what it is that you're afraid of, underlying that anger, no matter what it is that you're angry about, underlying that anger is something that you're afraid of, something that has threatened you. So he says we avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. There's that reference again, helpful to the person that we're angry at. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will help. God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. Now on the next page over here, actually, you know what? Stay on the same page, and the next paragraph there, he's saying, referring to the list again. Putting out of our minds, this is a reference to the list of harms done others. This one paragraph right here is the directions, but at the bottom of this paragraph is an explanation of what it is, how the spiritual solution to this harms done others comes into play. And you can see where he says, we place them before us in black and white. This is the bottom of that paragraph where he wrote, referring to the list again. We place them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. Now that's a reference to step 5 where he says we admitted our wrongs honestly in step 5, and out in steps 8 and 9 we became willing to set these matters straight. Okay, well actually 8 says willing and then 9 says we set them straight. But if you ask me, that's a reference to 8 and 9. He didn't have to write we became willing to set these matters straight and we proceeded to set these matters straight. That's pretty much the idea he's trying to get across there. That's a reference to 8 and 9. On the next page over here, there's 2 paragraphs in the middle of the page. These are the paragraphs that are essentially an explanation of how faith in God combats fear, and these 2 paragraphs are a reference to step 12. And of course, not only in step 12 do we apply faith, but in step 6 and 7, we ask God to remove these fears. And at the bottom of these 2 paragraphs here, so this would be about 8 or 10 lines up from the bottom, he says, we asked him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be at once we commence to outgrow fear. That's a pretty intense statement right there, that essentially fear is, remember when we were going back in the 3rd step where he said that selfishness and self-centeredness, driven by 100 forms of fear, is the root of our alcoholism. The root of our alcoholism is selfishness and self-centeredness, and that selfishness and self-centeredness is driven by fear. So essentially, fear is the root cause of our alcoholism, and this is the spiritual solution to fear. When he says we asked him to remove our fear, you can easily say, so what step is it that I ask God to remove what's blocking me from him? 6 and 7. In 6 and 7, I ask God to remove my fear, and then I direct my attention to what he would have me be is step 12. One of his, remember in the 3rd step he said, he is the principal and we are his agents. This concept is simple, or what did he say? I don't want to use my own words. This is in the 3rd step on page 62, at the bottom of the page there, where he says, this is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. That's step 1. It didn't work. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. He is the principal, and we are his agents. That's the point that step 12 essentially is. That God is the principal, and we are his agents is a reference to step 12. What is it when you say something along the lines of the principal and the agent? Is most of us would come to like insurance. that you are an insurance agent and there's a life insurance policy principle of about $1 million policy, and you got to be an agent and go out there and sell. And that's essentially what step 12 is. We go out there and one at a time try to sell God to the drunks who've lost their way. They, like ourselves, are sick too, right? So there's more to it in those 2 paragraphs, but we've been over it last week, and we'll go over it again as we get out into some of the latter steps out there. So we've covered those 3 spiritual solutions there. And one of the best places to see it's all in one area. And Bill Wilson does his own little summary of the 4th step on page 70. It's that last paragraph in the 4th step. And in this paragraph, he makes a quick reference to all 3, actually the 4 spiritual solutions. If we have been thorough about our personal inventory, this is page 70 at the bottom. If we have been thorough about our personal inventory, we have written down a lot. We have listed and analyzed our resentments. We have begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. We have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. Now this is a sort of a reference to forgiveness. We have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even our enemies, for we look on them as sick people. That's a reference to that solution we were just reading, forgiveness, okay? We have listed the people we have hurt by our conduct and are willing to straighten out the past if we can. That's a reference to amends. In this book, you read again and again that faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves, and there's a reference to faith right there. We hope you are now convinced that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from Him. If you have already made a decision in the 3rd step and an inventory of your grosser handicaps, you have made a good beginning. That being so, you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. So back out to the 6th step. We've gotten past those promises of the 5th step, which is where we finished up last week, and that idea that our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now I'm in the middle of page 75 there. And if you're not familiar with the promises of the 5th step, it's those 8 or 9 lines right in the center of the page on 75. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel we are on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. So if this hasn't happened to you in the 5th step, maybe we need to back up a little bit, because I don't know about you guys, but I felt the nearness to my Creator in the 3rd step is when it came to me, when I asked God to come into my life. Anyway, returning home, so this is beginning of the step 6. It's only like 2 paragraphs, if that. We'll finish this up. And step 6 is, we're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. And the way a guy pointed it out to me once, and I said, you know what, that's the clearest, simplest explanation that I've ever heard. And repeatedly throughout these pages, you'll see we turn back to the steps which contain the first 5 proposals, which is one of the things we had just written. We're fixing to read here in a minute here. So when we get to it, hang on, we'll just get to it here. Returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour after we've done the 5th step here. Carefully reviewing what we have done, we thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know Him better. Taking this book down from the shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. That's 58, right? Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have omitted anything. So stop right there and go back to the page. He's telling us, he's actually instructing us to go back to the page which contains the 12 steps. And you go back to page 59, and you look at those first 5 steps, and you ask yourself if you have omitted anything. And carefully review the first 5 proposals, and obviously we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives have become unmanageable. Back to that one page, which is the best description I've seen of it, it says we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Remember where we're going here. We're going to a place where we're going to have a complete reliance and dependence upon God for everything. As Bill puts it, we must turn in all things to the Father of light. And that doesn't mean this and that, and all things, every single thing, even your breathing when you're sound asleep at night and your heartbeat when you're 3 o'clock in the morning and you're asleep. Turn in everything, because that's where it is anyway. Anybody who thinks they have any control over their own lives, in my opinion, is just, they're fooling themselves. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Do you believe in God, yes or no? Hopefully the answer to the question is yes. We got that whole chapter. We agnostics is dedicated to saying that the 50% of the original fellowship were atheists or agnostics, and it goes on to say they became converts. They later became converts to our way of thinking here. And third step, made a decision to turn our will and our lives. And there's a couple of places that are real good descriptions. One of them is Bill's story, where he says something along the lines of, God is everything, and without him I am nothing. I'll tell you what, go there and we'll look at it real quick. It's the best description of the third step that I believe we have. My description of the third step is, my only reason for living is to serve God. I have no other reason for living. I burned up all my other avenues and exhausted everything, and the only reason I live from this point on is to serve God. And Bill's got one here that's pretty good, back in Bill's story. Where was it? Step 3 for Bill is on page 13. Top of the page on 13 in Bill's story. There I humbly offered myself to God, as I then understood him, to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, and without him I was lost. And that's Bill's third step right there. And you got here in how it works. We stood at the turning point. Half measures availed us nothing. It doesn't mean turn over an hour of your day to him for an AA meeting. It doesn't mean I'll give you a little time now and then, God, when you need it. It means from this point on, your only reason for living is to serve God. And, you know, one of the things that we get out of that, too, is the idea of self-will versus God's will. The idea that what's wrong with an alcoholic is self-will, and the spiritual solution to this is God's will. It gives us the two opposite ends of the spectrum of recovery, of with a problem and the solution. So with this, we say, made a decision to turn my will and my life. You know, one of the other things that I've used to describe that was, you know, when I first decided to turn my life over to God, I did it because I felt like I didn't have any other decision. I didn't have any other choice. I said, I have been through the ringer for years. I've been drunk and in jail so many times. Like, I feel right now that I have no other choice but to turn my life over to the care of God. And I'm really not doing it of my own free will. I'm doing it because I have no other choice in the matter. I have exhausted all other avenues. Therefore, here I am. I'm out of here. If this don't work, I'm out of here, is what I said. I'm done with this shit. I don't want to do it anymore. I can't take it anymore. So when I showed up, and as I got the results of doing the 12 steps in my life, today, of my own free will, I offer my life to God. I say, you know what? This is what I want to do now. I felt forced to do it in the beginning, but today, of my own free will, I offer my life to you, God. What do you want me to do? And you understand how the difference of that is? The difference between how I felt in the beginning versus of where it says today, it says, made a decision to turn my will over to the care of God, which is essentially saying that why I live my life, what it is that keeps me alive today is what I offer back to God too. My free will. I always say, look, if you could hold your free will in your hands and say, you know, take it out of your head and hold it in your hands and say, I have the free will to do whatever it is I want to do. And you know what? This is great. Now, you can have it back, God. What do you want me to do? You understand? It's really deep, and not many people, in my opinion, fully understand that. And I believe that's where most people are having trouble with in recovery. When you see them going in and out, they're having trouble with that, giving that will back to God. And like I said, I didn't do it willingly either. I did it out of, when I first started, I said, I don't have any other choice to do this. But later on, after I got the result, if you would have sat there and told me and said, you know, when you live a complete life of selflessness and sacrifice for others, you're going to find everything you ever wanted in life, I'd have said, you are out of your flipping mind. You have no idea, you're a retard or something. Get away from me, man. But when you get to try to live that way of life and to do, I'm not perfect, but I have had a taste of it. I've had a taste of living a life of doing things for other people without any conditions on it, and I can tell you it's what you're looking for. Other than to say, there's a reference in there that says the bridge of reason does not lead to the land of faith. What that means to me is no amount of intellect in my head will get me closer to God. No matter how much I sit there and think about it, no matter how much I contemplate it, no matter how many books I read on it, none of those will get me closer to God. The only thing that will get me closer to God is my action, whether I go out there and actually live a life of service to others. Do you understand that? And it is through that process over the years that today I say to myself, of my own free will today, I have gotten the results of doing things for others and the feeling that I get inside about who I am for doing those things, and I can tell you that it's what you're looking for. I mean, I heard somebody say that years ago, must have been 18, 20 years ago when I heard, it went in one ear and out the other, and I kind of stopped and registered it for a minute, and I go, another bunch of mindless crap I have no use for, But after many years of trying to not to relapse, essentially, I can tell you that it is the way we're trying to teach, the things we're trying to teach in here. Okay, about to the fourth step. Remember, we turn back to the page which contains the 12 steps, carefully reviewing the first 5 proposals. We ask if we have omitted anything. Fourth step, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Don't let that word moral inventory, that stewed me for years. I didn't want to raise my hand in a meeting and say, you know what, I must be stupid or something, because I just don't know what in the hell you're talking about with a moral. Did you have any kind of dictionary to explain the moral inventory? But when you read it, Bill Wilson's like an educated guy, he didn't want to say made a searching and fearless made a searching and fearless inventory of our most common manifestations of self. That's one of the ways I put it. I say, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of the most common manifestations of self that block us from God, which is a life of sacrifice and service and sacrifice for others. It's essentially the whole thing in a nutshell. And in step 5, I admitted to God, to myself, and to another human being the exact nature of my wrongs, which is the most common manifestations of self that block me from God or receiving and doing God's will, which is a life of service and sacrifice for others for the God of my understanding. Some guy said years ago, how does God come to people? God comes to people through people. And I have to tell you that the only way that I've ever experienced unconditional love was through, I would have to say, first my grandparents, and then later as my mother and my stepfather got older, I experienced through them unconditional love. That no matter what I did, they still said, okay, come on back. We ain't kicking you out yet, and we still care about you and all that. But that's the only place that I ever really, most of the people in my life, as soon as things got rough, they said, get away from me, man, But anyway, so, I think one of the references he's making there is also do not leave anything off of your fourth step and say to yourself, you know what, I'm not telling anybody that. I don't give a crap what they say in AA. I'm taking this to my grave. I am not telling anybody that right there. That's when you have a problem. Whether it is you've got to find a lawyer, a doctor, a priest, a minister, a rabbi. You don't have to share it with another alcoholic. I tell my guys that I take through the steps, I say, look, tell me everything you got, but if you got one thing you're not telling anybody, you take that to a priest or something like that. Somebody, or take the whole thing to a priest. Whatever you want to do, it's not actually says, but I tell you, there's a benefit of taking your fourth step to your sponsor, because your sponsor can cross-reference, like we're saying here. Like he's saying, we turn back to the list for it held the key. We turn to the page containing the first 5 proposals. Carefully reviewing them, we asked ourselves if we have omitted anything. And can a priest, a minister, or a rabbi do this with you? I don't know. Maybe they're not familiar with our 12 steps. Maybe they're not familiar. So therefore, it's recommended that you do it with somebody who knows what the hell they're doing, because you don't just sit there and listen. You actually have some kind of interaction. Okay, there's not like some psychiatrist just kicks his feet up and listens to you whine for an hour and then says, okay, see you next week. It's not like that, okay? But anyway, back to step 6. Where were we? 76. Step 6 and 7 are on page 76. Yeah, it was 75. We're on the bottom of the page there. There's only like another 3 or 4 lines or something like that. Okay. For we are building an arch through which we shall walk a free man. Now, you see what he's saying there? We are building an arch through which we shall walk a free man. Now, remember back in step 3, he said the third step is the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which, I'll tell you what, go back to it. I don't want to leave you guys thinking, well, he's just up there babbling about shit. This is on, we were reading it a minute ago. Okay. We never finished reading it. It's on page 62 at the bottom of the page, where I was pointing out that he is the principal and we are his agents, okay? And what is the principal and the agents? The principal is that $1 million life insurance policy. We are the agents that got to go out and sell that life insurance policy, or sell God to drunks, the way we put it. He is the Father and we are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this simple concept of he is the principal and we are his agents, most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. So there's a reference to the keystone of the new and triumphant arch. Remember what I said to you a minute ago. My only reason for living today is to serve God. I have no other reason to live. I've been through them all. I said to myself, I am the center of the universe. I am the reason for everything that I do. And then I said that this other person is the center, and I have to tell you that it just doesn't. It gets me to the end of my rope is where it gets me. It gets me all the way to the end, and there's nothing left, and I don't want to do it anymore, so we got to try something else here. That ain't working. So the keystone of the new and triumphant arch, and the reference that he's making, you got to think about old masonry, where there's a big archway made out of stones, and on the top, that center stone that's holding the, let's say there's two sides with like 6, we'll say 6. There's 6 stones on each side and one right in the middle holding those 6 stones on each side up. You pull that middle keystone out and down comes everything else. So on the third step, being the keystone of that new and triumphant arch, hinges all of the other steps. That the successful consummation of all of the other 12 steps is absolutely dependent upon this keystone of the new and triumphant arch, in which he is the principal and we are his agents, he is the Father and we are his children. So back to the page again, where we're just making another reference, for we are building an arch through which we will walk a free man. 75 at the bottom. For we are building an arch through which we shall walk a free man at last. Is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? You see all that he's referencing right there is, I always say to my sponsees lately, I say, now I want you to picture that archway with step 3 as the keystone that's supporting these 2 sides. And on these 2 sides, these other stones are labeled step 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Over here is 9, 10, 11, 12. And these are the stones that are this archway that you're walking through. And that third step being the keystone, that's the reference that he's making here. Why is he saying, and the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement? What is that crap? That's what he's talking about. He's talking about that archway through which we walk a free man, free from that obsession for that first drink. If we can answer to our satisfaction, this is 76 at the top. If we can answer to our satisfaction, then we look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can he now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. And back to what I was telling you a minute ago. This guy says to me years ago, he says, now look at the steps in this light. As a result of the first 5 steps, we're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. Put that in before you get to step 6. Say that. As a result of the first 5 steps, we're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. So the statement is, who in their right mind wants to hang on to their anger? Who's going to sit there and say, you know what, I think I'm going to hang on to my anger. I'm really enjoying these heated exchanges that I'm having with everybody. These fist fights I'm getting into, whatever it is, the trips to jail for assault and battery, the screaming matches, the grouch and the brainstorm, the way Bill puts it in here. Who in their right mind is going to say, I'm going to hang on to my fear. I'm kind of liking the fear thing. I'm not ready to turn loose of my fear. I'm not ready to turn loose of the guilt that I feel for the harms that I had done other people. Who in their right mind would say that? So you see what we're saying there is that step 6 is speaking in a past tense. Step 6 is telling us that as a result of the first 5 steps, yes, I'm ready to have God remove these defects of character. Who in their right mind wouldn't? You understand? There's really nothing to do in step 6 but acknowledge this is where you're at. So he says returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour. That's all we're doing in step 6. I don't know where that it's the step that separates the men from the boys comes from. That's in the 12 and 12. And I've often asked, how is it the step that separates the men from the boys? Back to that idea. Who in their right mind wants to hang on to anger, fear, guilt? Nobody. But anyway, we got 15 minutes for open discussion, and we'll do step 7 and probably 8 next week. Anybody like to share on steps 1 through 6? Any kind of comments on it? Any questions? Anybody want to drink tonight? Something you want to share? The format of the meeting is Big Book. I'm going to read for about 20, 25 minutes or something. We'll open up the floor for open discussion. We'll try to get through a couple of paragraphs maybe. I'm an alcoholic. My name's Doug. We're on page 76 today, and we just finished step 7 last week, I guess it was. Now, remember where we were. In the 4th step, he keeps making a reference to turning back to the 4th step list. So, you're going to take your list, and you're going to go back to this list. And in step 6 and step 8, there's really nothing to do in these steps. There's nothing to do but acknowledge. It's sort of a stopping point and acknowledging. Remember when we did step 6, he said, returning home, this is 1 page back on 75. He said, returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour, that bottom paragraph on page 75. Carefully reviewing what we have done, we thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know Him better. Taking this book down from our shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have omitted anything. Now remember what we were doing here. All you're doing in step 6 is taking the book down and reviewing the first 5 steps and asking yourself, have you omitted anything off? Have you left anything off? The idea he put out there of the triumphant arch, remember that back in the 3rd step, the triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. And these are the stones on the sides of that arch, and the 3rd step is the keystone, as he put it, the keystone of that new and triumphant arch. In step 6 is an acknowledgement step only, and so too is step 8, and that's where we're at tonight. In the middle of the page on page 76 is the 1 paragraph that covers step 8. And all it really says is we're acknowledging that we have a list. We've already made it when we took our inventory in the 4th step. And we're acknowledging that, yes, I am willing to make these amends. Remember, it was agreed in the beginning that you would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. So that's all we're doing in step 8 is an acknowledgement step, both of them. I always say step 6 is as a result of the first 5 steps. Yes, I'm entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. Remember that the defects of character are not, they're not a secret. We know that they are anger, fear, and guilt. And from those 3, the most common manifestations of stealth stem all other forms. So when we were doing step 7, we reviewed that essentially step 7 is asking God to remove all of these defects of character, but it deals primarily with the forgiveness, because if you're asking God to remove the guilt that blocks you from Him, that's the purpose of steps 8 and 9. Is to remove the guilt from us. And if you're asking God to remove the fear, that's the purpose of step 12. Step 12 is essentially faith in God. It's how we combat fear, okay? So step 7 deals with, although it also deals with guilt and fear, it deals primarily with anger, to relieve me, and the 2 paragraphs in step 4, which described how to apply forgiveness to others. It was something along the lines of, this was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick, and he went on for 2 paragraphs to explain to us the process of forgiveness in step 7 last week. And step 8, we're going to start reading here now. We got the middle of the page on step 8, middle of the page on 76. Now we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. Let's look at steps 8 and 9. We have a list of all persons we have harmed. So he's not saying that we're going to sit down and make another list. He says he's saying in a past tense, we already have this list. And to whom we are willing to make amends. It doesn't say, and to whom we're going to somehow become willing to make amends. He says we already are. He's speaking in a past tense. If you'll read it from that standpoint, we already have a list, and to whom we are already willing to make amends to. We made it when we took inventory. We subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal, and this is the beginning of step 9. Now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. So all you're doing in step 8 is acknowledging that you already have this list and that you're willing to make these amends. And I tell you, I've been to the seminar, and I'll give you an example of what they said. They said you're going to make like a list of people that you're going to make amends to right away, a list of people that you plan on getting to someday. It was kind of silly. I mean, looking back on it, I thought a lot of it when I first heard it, but today, I mean, it's just... And then they said, you'll eventually get to the people that you swear you'll never make amends to. And that's not the way I see it today. The way I see it is, you've got a choice here. You can make amends for the harms that you've done to others, or you can go out and drinking. What's it going to be? That's pretty much what it boils down to. It's not a matter of, gee, I really don't feel like making amends to these. I'll make amends to those people, but I'm not making amends. Oh, really? Well, have a drink on me, pal, because that's pretty much what it boils down to. It's either make amends or drink. You got it? So there's where the willingness comes from. Just like in step 6, where he says if we have the willingness to have God remove these defects of character. Where do you get the willingness from? From the respect, I like to say. Not from the fear that alcohol will come back into my life and I will drink again, because a fear-based sobriety is a recipe for failure. What you want is a faith-based sobriety. I always say early on I may have had a fear-based sobriety, but later on it turned into a faith-based sobriety, because eventually a fear-based sobriety will fail you. What does he say in that one? I forget. The knowledge of your condition, the knowledge of that we fail to bring into our memories, even the knowledge of a week or a few days ago, the pain and suffering, that eventually it will be blotted out by the fear that compels us to drink, that the fear that is at the root of the obsession for the first one. Now, when we get into the 9th step, there are many things here that we need to be paying attention to. Number 1 is, why do I have to make amends? Because remember what we're trying to do here. We are looking to find what blocks us from God, and we're looking to get rid of what blocks us from God. And what blocks us from God in this particular aspect that we're looking at here, this list that we're looking at, the list of persons that we had harmed, is the guilt that we feel inside for what we had done. And, the way my sponsor used to put it, he said, if you do good, you're going to feel good inside about who you are. It's not a matter of whether you want to feel good and you're doing poor behavior. If you're stealing and lying and cheating and you say to yourself, no, but I want to feel good, then you need to change your behavior, because how you feel inside about who you are is a direct result of what it is that you do in the world through your actions. You understand that if you're lying and cheating and stealing from people, you're going to be feeling that on the inside, because it's just the way it is. That's the way that the conscience of the human mind is. Unless somebody truly has a mental illness and that antisocial, I forget the name of that. I keep wanting to write that thing down. There's a antisocial behavior that they have, not psychotic, but it's what do you say?
Borderline personality disorder.
No. There's a certain word that the psychiatrists use for people who have no conscience and hurt other people, and it doesn't affect them. You understand? You're familiar with it. I just can't remember it right now. Anyway, the antisocial behavior. So what we're talking about here is by making these amends, I'm going to free myself. Number one, I'm going to free myself from the guilt that I feel for what I've done to the people in my life, primarily my family and the people that were close to me. And another thing that we're expected to get from this is we're going to, the way Bill Wilson put it was, he said, we learned a lot from psychiatry early on in sobriety. And one of the things we learned was that the human mind has a certain behavior to it, whether we want to or not. Let me put it to you this way: when he's dealing with anger, Bill Wilson writes in the resentment list, he says, we could no more wish this anger away than we could our alcohol. We have to have God's help. And what he's saying in that statement is that I can tell you as a person, I say, you have a problem with anger. You need to deal with, and you're going to say, oh, yeah, I've had several people tell me I have a problem with anger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a conscious decision to not be angry anymore. I'm going to work on my anger. But guess what? You are powerless over your anger, so you can't work on it. It's like saying I'm going to stop drinking. You understand? Someone says, you got a problem drinking. And you go, okay, I have a problem drinking. I'm going to cut back on my drinking. Well, guess what? You ain't got no power over your drinking. And that's why he makes that reference when he says that we're just as powerless over anger, and I'm just as powerless over my guilt. You see, what we're dealing with is, as Bill Wilson put it, was the inner workings of the subconscious human mind. We're dealing with parts of the human mind that operate below the level of conscious thought. And I'll give you another example. Let's say you're in a room full of 15 people, somebody pulls out a gun and starts shooting, blah, 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 blah. You don't sit around and go, somebody's shooting in this room. I think I'm going to head for that door as fast as I can, just without even thinking about it. There you go. You just bang for the door, Or you're in a crowded theater and somebody yells fire, and there's a big fire. You don't make a conscious decision to run out the door. You just subconsciously, your mind operates, many parts of our minds operate on the subconscious level. And so too does what Bill Wilson calls the root cause of alcoholism. Anger, fear, and guilt, all three operate below the level of conscious thought. You understand that what he's saying is, I do not make a conscious decision to get angry. What happens is somebody does something, I feel like I'm threatened by it, and I react to it I don't sit around and think, you know what, I'm going to get angry about this. It's just you react, and that's all there is to it. We're dealing with something that operates below the level of conscious thought. And when we're talking about the ninth step, what we're dealing with is guilt, okay? Guilt operates below. Nobody makes a conscious decision to either feel guilty for what they did or to turn it off and not feel guilty for what they did. If you have done behavior that has affected another person negatively or adversely, you're going to feel bad about it. You're going to feel guilty about it, and you don't have a decision on whether you're going to feel that way or not. You understand? But there is a way of how to retrain our subconscious minds how to react in the future. And that is by not doing these things in the first place, by paying the price for what we've done in the past. Do you understand? As Bill puts it in the promises of the ninth step, he says, we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. I always say, do you think he's talking about a situation, let me say, somebody spills their soda pop on the table or something. You think, I will intuitively know how to handle that situation? Or do you think he's talking about what we've been dealing with here, the inner workings of the subconscious human mind, how we deal with anger, how we deal with fear, how we deal with guilt? Those are the situations that we're going to intuitively know how to handle. That's the things that we're going to teach our subconscious human mind how to deal with intuitively. And you have to, and there's a promise in the 10th step where he says, I'll take you out there just for a second, and we'll show you, because the 10th step and the 9th step are real close to one another, and the 9th step is actually in step 10 on a daily basis. Go to page 84, the promises of the 10th step. You'll see where he says on the top of page 85, we will react sanely and normally, and when someone sets one of our favorite whatever it is down in front of us. Jack Daniels, Budweiser, whatever it is. We will react sanely and normally. We will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. Why is that? because I've been training my subconscious mind how to deal with the things that were at the root of my obsession for the first one. Do you understand? That we're saying that in my mind, there is something that drives my brain to the first one. There's an underlying cause and condition. That's the words he uses in the fourth step. There's an underlying cause and condition that is the driving force behind my obsession for the first one. And when I begin to reteach my mind how to deal with my anger, how to deal with my fear, and how to deal with the guilt that I feel through the process that we've outlined here in what we call the spiritual solutions. Okay. Now, in these spiritual solutions, all four aspects must be present. Like he says, it's easily seen in step 5, where he says we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Well, you can see all 4 of those aspects easily in that 5th step. Well, so too are all 4 of those aspects in the spiritual solutions of forgiveness, faith in God, and making amends. Each one of them includes ourselves, God, another human being, and action. The action of the admission in step 5 is the action of actually sitting down with somebody and telling them that. But in the forgiveness, the action is how can I be of help to them? And making amends, the action is quite clear, making amends, and it's not rocket science. One of the things you need to notice about the 9th step too is the idea of not creating more damage as you go along. I always use the example of saying, you can tell your wife you cheated on her, but you can't tell him it was with who, his sister or something, or her sister or whatever. Anyway, back to where we were reading. So that's the idea we're going to be getting from these next few pages. Is we're going to reteach our subconscious minds how to deal with the guilt that we feel. And how are we going to intuitively know how to handle these situations? Because we're not going to create them in the first place. We're going to teach our subconscious minds that there is a price to be paid when you lie to somebody. There is a price to be paid when you steal or cheat from somebody. You cannot do it and think nothing's going to happen to me. Of course something's going to happen to you. You're going to keep drinking, wondering, what the hell's going on with me? Okay. Our next, no, wait a minute, I'm in 10. We're back on number 9 on page 76, and now we go out, this is the middle of the page here. Now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live life on self-will and run the show ourselves. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning that we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. So that phrase right there, we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol, is in this state of the recovery a reference to making amends in the 9th step. And later on, when he says we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol, this is making your 12th step work the number one thing in your life. You say, well, my relationship with God is the number one thing in my life, and your relationship with God is going to be based on step 12. The other steps, like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, all of these steps are essentially designed to bring you to step 12. That's like their sole purpose for existence, okay? Probably there are still some misgivings. As we look over the list of business acquaintances and friends we have hurt, we may feel diffident about going to some of them on a spiritual basis. Let us be reassured, to some people we need not and probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature on our first approach. Obviously what he's saying there is, you don't have to tell them why you're doing it. You just have to say, look, I was feeling real guilty about what I did, and I think I need to apologize for something. Instead of telling them, look, I'm in AA, I'm doing my step 9, and I was wondering. We might prejudice them. At the moment, we're trying to put our lives in order. And this is one of the second places in the whole big book where I see the will of God actually described in this one sentence right here. At the moment, we're trying to put our lives in order. But this is not an end in itself. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. that is essentially a reference to step 12. Because if you'll remember back in the third step, Bill Wilson wrote, here, I'll tell you, we'll go back to it real quick. I have a problem with, sometimes I'll just say things off the top of my head and people don't know whether I'm just coming up with this stuff or whether it's in the book. So go back to page 62 down at the bottom of the page. And this is what I was getting at, was the idea that Bill Wilson states that our relationship with God is going to be based essentially on our 12th step work. And the spiritual solutions outlined in the other steps are designed for that purpose in mind. Okay, this is at the bottom of the page on 62, about 8 or 10 lines up, where he says, this is the how and why of it. It's essentially talking about these two paragraphs are the whole program in a nutshell, okay? He says, this is the how and why of it. First of all, as in the first step, we had to quit playing God. And remember, because in order to become completely dependent upon a God of your understanding, you must first smash the idea that you are it, okay? First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, we decided, and what's decided, that's the third step. So in the third step, we decided that hereafter, in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. And the reason he's saying director is because he just gave us that analogy of every person is like an actor who wants to run the show. He wants to arrange the lights, the furniture, the scenery. He wants to do everything instead of just acting and having a director tell him what to do. So that's why he's given that God was going to be our director thing, because we haven't really gone back. But in this last previous page, he gave us that analogy, one of many analogies that he gives in this book. Now, this is what I was getting at right here. The reason I brought us back here is that he is the principal and we are his agents, okay? He is the principal and we are his agents. That's a reference to step 12. That it's essentially a reference to like an insurance policy and an insurance agent who goes out and sells on $1 million life insurance policy, and he sells to as many people as he can, and whoever dies first gets the $1 million while the others pile into. So that's essentially what he's saying, is that God is the principal and we are his agents, is we have to go out and sell God as the principal, and we are an agent of God. And the way I look at it is the unconditional love idea, that we are to, as an agent of God, we must express this unconditional love, and in the form that it takes in Alcoholics Anonymous is when someone says, will you take me through the steps, you take them through the steps unconditionally. Back to, this is not an end in itself. This is where we were on page 77 in the ninth step amends here. This is not an end in itself. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. And what I was going to get to was how do we be of maximum service to God? By being his agent, by going out there and selling God to the drunks who haven't found him yet. Okay, and you see, there's an underlying purpose about this that's not really mentioned much in here, but it can be found in some of the other literature, like Comes of Age or Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, Pass It On, Language of the Heart. There's a lot in there about ego deflation, and there was a quick mention of ego in the third step where he said. I'm not going to go back to it now, but the idea of ego deflation and humility are essentially the same thing, and this ego deflation is what was initially delivered to us as alcoholics. And remember the idea that I was talking about with the subconscious human mind, the inner workings of the subconscious human mind, and the idea that one of the psychiatrists who Bill Wilson actually called one of the founders, and they often said Bill would humbly say, look, I'm not a founder of AA. These guys are the founders of AA. And he would go on to mention, Frank Buckman, the guy that invented Oxford groups, the Buckmanites or whatever you want to call them, and the way the things that sprung AA, the things at the root of why and how AA became what it is. And he would point to the psychiatrists too and say, and one of them was the Harry Tiebout. And Harry Tiebout's deal was he really stuck to the idea of ego deflation, because it was this initial ego deflation that would sober people up. His experience was that he didn't know how to point people, and he worked with people for many years before he ever met Bill Wilson, that he would point these people in the direction of ego deflation, but he didn't know how to induce that ego deflation. That he would see people, before he ever met Bill Wilson in New York, in that New York meeting, he was at the one of those Knickerbocker or whatever it was hospital in New York. His observance of the people that he would work with was that they would come in beaten and crying and in tears and smashed as a human being, completely broken. And there was no thought of a drink in their head. That's all they were thinking of was, I don't want to do this anymore. And they seemed safe and protected, and they would even say something along the lines of, I feel like something's happened, something's different with me. I feel as though I will never take another drink as long as I live. And then through no fault of their own, just through as Harry Tiebout said, the human ego has an amazing ability to restore itself to its former omnipotent glory. Those were his words, he said. And he said that he would observe these people, and see, he didn't know how to induce this ego deflation and this humility, which is what AA does for us, by the way, if you hadn't figured that out yet. What AA does, and this is what Harry Tiebout said after many years of studying why he was failing to help anybody get sober, but 1 in 100 or something, and that's like a natural thing for 1 in 100. You wouldn't have to do anything for that to happen. His ability to help people, was virtually non-existent, and he came to AA as Bill Wilson put it, an honorary member of Alcoholics Anonymous who was not really an alcoholic and could take one drink and put it down. But he said, after a number of years of studying his people, he said, what it seems to be happening in this AA place is that these alcoholics come in and they just completely smashed and broken, and they go through this program of recovery in which they have a process that they keep this ego deflation, maybe not at the level that it was originally when they were smashed by alcohol, but they keep this humility, this ego deflation. He called AA, for recovering alcoholics, AA and his program was a continued source for ego deflation. How that works is, and what I was getting at was where he says our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and to the people about us. So how does, and it's step 12 that we're talking about, remember, how does step 12 deflate my ego? How does step 12 keep me a humble person? Because it's sort of an action of acknowledging that I am not the God of this world. I am not in control of anything. I can't even control I like to say I can't even control my own breathing when I'm asleep. God is controlling my breathing and my heartbeat while I'm sleeping. And in that same context, that's how out of control every area of our lives is. Some people think they have control of other things, but here comes a heart attack real soon. It's going to straighten them out on that matter. You have little or no control over almost anything in your life. God controls everything except for your free will. That's the only thing that God does not control. Your free will to do whatever you want to do, and this is what's given you so much trouble, that you must offer your free will back to God on a daily, if hourly, if not basis. I think even Silkworth said that they must submit their will. They must submit to God's will and offer their will back to God on an hourly basis if they have to early on. But that what they must do is acknowledge that God is in control of all things, and I control nothing except for my free will. And the correct use of my free will is to see it for what it is and offer that back to God and say, thank you for my free will. What do you want me to do? That's essentially what we're saying here, is I have to be an agent of God and sell God to others. You understand that? So, back to the reading. It is seldom wise to approach an individual who still smarts from our injustice to him, and announce that we have gone religious. In the prize ring, this would be called leading with the chin. Why lay ourselves open to being branded fanatics or religious bores? We may kill a future opportunity to carry a beneficial message. But our man is sure to be impressed with a sincere desire to set right the wrong. He is going to be more interested in a demonstration of goodwill than in our talk of spiritual discoveries. We don't use this as an excuse for shying away from the subject of God when it will serve any good purpose. We are willing to announce our convictions with tact and common sense. Now, this is where the directions on how to make amends begins. There are essentially 6 types of amends, and one of those types is more geared toward people who are dead or people who we will never see, a type of amends that we will never be able to make. Okay, and this first one of these, the next 9 pages, next 8 pages, we've already into the first page. The next 8 pages deal exclusively with what types of amends and the general idea of how to make those amends. And this first type of amend is the type of the man that we hated. And he says the question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. It may be he has done us more harm than we have done him, and though we may have acquired a better attitude toward him, we are still not too keen about admitting our faults. Nevertheless, with a person we dislike, we take the bit in our teeth. It is harder to go to an enemy than to a friend, but we find it much more beneficial to us. We go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feeling and expressing our regret. So forgiveness is in here too. So I guess what he's doing here is he's making a reference to the fact that this person that we hated has done something that's wronged us in the past, and we have already gone through steps 4, 5, 6, and 7 and have dealt with this idea of forgiveness in steps 6 and 7. I'm going to open up the floor for open discussion, and we'll pick up right there, which is at the end of the that's not the end of the question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. That's not the end of those directions for how to approach the man we hated, but we'll pick up right there. Under no condition do we criticize such a person, okay? We'll pick up right there next week.